Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 3 of What If Naruto was Shinobi Ashikabi. If you guys enjoyed this what if and want to see part 4 of it, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. The next morning, Musubi woke up on the large air mattress in hers in Naruto's room. At least when put in perspective to the fact that she was at least on the air mattress and not the floor. In truth, it would be more accurate to say that she was only half on the mattress, while the rest of her was on top of Naruto. She was pressed firmly against her Ashikabi, her head resting on his chest, her breasts pressed against his torso. One of her arms had been thrown across his chest, her hand resting in the center of his chest, and one of her legs was leisurely stretched across his own. She closed her eyes and took a moment to enjoy the relatively new sensations being with Naruto brought. His heart was beating steadily against her ear, a rhythmic pumping that made her feel calm and at peace with the world around her. Never in all her life had she even dared to dream that being with her Ashikabi could evoke such powerful feelings from her. She knew, of course, that her Ashikabi was the one person she would end up loving with all her heart, but even she had not known the true extent that love would extend to. A part of her couldn't help but wonder if this was something all Sekirei felt when they were with their Ashikabi. Was this something solely unique to Naruto? Or were these sort of feelings common? It was a question without an answer, and Musubi, who was never one for caring much about such things, forgot all about her previous thoughts in favor of enjoying Naruto's presence. The warmth Naruto was emitting was something to be cherished as well. His body was producing a natural heat that surpassed any of the heating devices she had used before, while living in the laboratory at MBI. It felt like his soul was warming her up with its love. And even though she had only just met him, Musubi somehow knew that this heat was just something of Naruto that had nothing to do with their bond. He was just a warm person, the heat he emitted was a reflection of his soul. It was as she was coming down from the natural high caused by Naruto's presence, that Musubi noticed something else that she had missed during her relishing, the hand that was stroking her hair, fingers messaging her scalp that caused her to sigh in content. She snuggled herself deeper into the warm body of the blonde, once again thinking about how lucky she was to have the man laying beside her as her Ashikabi. Finally awake, Musubi-chan? Asked Naruto, his voice causing a rumble in his chest that reverberated through Musubi as well. Despite his voice being softer than she had heard it yesterday, there wasn't an ounce of sleepiness in his voice. It probably had to do with the fact that Naruto had been up for at least an hour already. He had been thinking about substituting himself with a pillow or clone, but found that the more he thought about doing such, the less he actually wanted to leave the warm embrace he had woken up in. Musubi looked up to see Naruto's blue eyes on her. Smiling, she greeted the blonde in a voice that was just a tad sleepy, letting her Ashikabi know that she wasn't quite awake yet. Naruto-sama, good morning, she yawned at the end, stretching out the word morning as she sucked in a lungful of air. Good morning to you as well, the blonde replied with an amused voice. His hand stopped its idle stroking as the brunette fighter blinked at him in a dazed manner. Did you have a good night's sleep? Of course I did, Musubi said with what Naruto was beginning to realize was her signature smile. She placed her head against the blonde's chest and again, closed her eyes, emitting a sigh of such content that even the deaf, dumb and ignorant, wouldn't be able to mistake. I was sleeping with you, Naruto-sama. I like this, being with you in this way. A novelty experience then? Asked Naruto, his tone of voice letting her know he was amused. There was a touch of something else in his tone, which Musubi missed entirely. It was a tone that would let those in the know realize that for all Naruto's experience with women, his current situation was as new to him as it was to Musubi. For all his know-how when it came to pleasing the opposite sex, for all his experience in seducing women, Naruto had never actually stayed with said women after the deed was done. This was the first time he had slept with a female and not left in the middle of the night. This was also the first time he had slept with a female and not had sex with them. A novelty experience indeed. Musubi didn't really know what novelty meant, but seemed to figure out that it must mean something good. MMHMM, she mumbled as she continued laying there. This was the first time we slept together, Naruto-sama. So it is, Naruto agreed. Despite himself, he couldn't help but feel slightly amused by Musubi. The girl took extreme amounts of pleasure in the most mundane of things. Not that that was a bad thing. It was a part of her charm. And while I would like to stay here with you, we need to begin the day. I wanted to be with you for a little bit longer, Musubi complained. She looked up at Naruto as her eyes became big and watery. The fact that she was using it so expertly to break the blonde's resolve had to make one wonder whether she actually knew what she was doing and was a lot more cunning than she acted. Or if she was just naive and was acting out in harmless innocence. Whatever the case may be, Naruto's resolve crumbled as per usual under that gaze. Well, I suppose we can stay here for a few more minutes. But we have more shopping to do today. We do? Musubi looked around at the bare room, not noticing anything out of place. What do we need? Naruto's sweat dropped at the question most people would assume was obvious. Then again, hadn't this girl told him that she had essentially grown up in a lab? Maybe she really didn't know why they needed to go shopping today. Now that we have a place to live, we're just going to out and buy some creature comforts. Looking back at the blonde Musubi blinked. Creature comforts. Ah. Check out this couch, Naruto-sama. It's so comfy. Musubi shouted excitedly from where she was sitting on the couch. She and Naruto had left early after breakfast to go shopping for more accessories to make their room more comfortable. It was very fun as far as she was concerned, though for her anything was fun so long as she was with her Ashikabi. So far they had gone to several stores and looked at things they felt they might need in their room. Naruto had told her that creature comforts were simply items such as furniture, plants, posters and any other number of things that they would place within their room to make it more livable. He called the act giving the room more character. He had also explained what character meant when she asked him about that. Naruto shook his head with an easygoing smile on his face. Moving over to the love seat, he sat down on it with her, and for no other reason than to humor the young woman who acted more like a child. Almost as soon as he sat down, his body sank into the plushy covering. "It is pretty nice," he agreed. "Do you want us to get this?" "Can we?" asked Musubi, her eyes looking hopefully wide as he clasped her hands in front of her face. "Can we really?" "If you want it," Naruto said. The smile that had been plastered onto his face since they left turned sly. "But do keep in mind that we only have about 25 square feet of space available to us. Perhaps it would be best if we kept this seat in mind, but continue shopping before we decide. You may find something else that serves the same function that you like more." "Okay," Musubi said, not having a problem with that. Even to her childish thoughts, the blonde's words made sense. The pair continued walking through the store, with Musubi trying out every chair, couch and otherwise sittable piece of furniture there and across. Thankfully she knew the difference between a couch and a dresser, and thus, he didn't have to worry about her trying to sit on something that simply wasn't meant for sitting. He did entertain the image of her doing that, however, and it was rather amusing to say the least. Musubi had asked him what he had been laughing about. Throughout the entire experience, Naruto found more strange feelings that he hadn't known himself to possess. This entire situation was one he had never been in before. Not just the shopping for household items with a female that he was now living with, but the shopping in general. Odd as it may seem, Naruto had never shopped for things like furniture and household appliances. When he was younger and just moving into his first apartment that he had been given upon leaving the orphanage, Sarutobi had been the one who had done all of the shopping for him. Naruto had lived in that apartment for the rest of his time in Konoha, until it was turned into a large crater by Nagato, and by that point he couldn't go shopping anyways, since his apartment and every store there had been destroyed. And while he might have considered it after the Fourth Great Shinobi War, he had been unable to do the same circumstances that had led him to being unable to form any meaningful bonds with others. In the end, it had come down to a simple question to which the answer had been obvious. Why bother buying appliances like a couch and furniture when you weren't going to be living in any one place for more than a year or two? Trip down memory lane aside, the shopping trip had, contrary to what some people might have thought, turned out to be not only an eventful time, but also very fun. Musubi, bless her soul, put so much enthusiasm into everything she did, that Naruto couldn't help but smile and laugh along with her as she enjoyed herself. The girl truly was a breath of fresh air to someone like him, whose eyes had become jaded to the world and everything in it. Even having just met, Musubi had already brought more positive emotions into his life than anything he had seen, done, or met within the last several thousand years. The shopping excursion itself lasted around 2 hours all told. In the end, they ended up buying a love seat of a different make that the short-haired brunette Sekirei decided she liked better. That wasn't the only thing they had bought, however, as Naruto ended up getting a small but high-quality desk with several drawers on either side for files, a slotted board above the ground on the bottom where a computer would go, slide-out keyboard table, and a place where he could set a printer if he wanted to, all of it painted in a glossy black color. Along with it he bought a comfortable wheeled leather computer chair to go along with the desk. He planned on buying the computer later on. In return, he let Musubi pick out the rest of the appliances they would have in their room. She had been ecstatic and ended up getting several lamps, brushed steel gooseneck torchie fleur lamps, a couple of fake potted plants, light blue curtains for the windows, and a dresser drawer made out of an exotic dark wood with a varnished finish. By the time the pair had finished shopping they must have been an odd sight. Naruto was carrying the lavesiette above his head, using only a single hand. On top of it was the computer chair, and under his other arm was the box containing the desk. Musubi on the other hand was carrying the table over her head, on top of it was the box with the drawer in it and the plants, and had the lamps under the arm she wasn't using to hold up the table. Naruto noticed the looks of shock and disbelief they were receiving inside, thankful that if nothing else, the desk and drawer were unmade in their boxes. Not only would the added dimension make all the items they bought infinitely harder to carry, it would have drawn even more attention than they did now. So much for remaining inconspicuous, he thought to himself. He looked over at Musubi and smiled. Still, I can't seem to find it in myself to truly complain. Yusubi didn't even notice the looks they received as they walked back home, or she did and just didn't understand. The latter case was more likely because her eyes were roving over the city, as if it was the first time they had seen it. As her eyes continued moving, they landed on the glass window with a display in the front of the store. To be more specific, they landed on the television set they were advertising in the front window. "Ah, a TV," she said, stopping in front of the display to look at the flat-screen television. Had she not been carrying several hundred pounds of furniture, it was more than likely that she would have pressed her face against the glass like a kid looking into a candy store. Naruto stopped as well when he noticed Yusubi was no longer following him. Looking back, he saw that she was staring at the TV, which he could hear was giving more news on the unnatural plant growth in the botanical garden. He chuckled as he walked back over to her. "I take it you like watching TV?" "Yes," Yusubi said enthusiastically, her head bobbing up and down in an exaggerated manner. It looked very comical, and Naruto had started to laugh before managing to turn it into a cough. The brunette fighter looked at him, tilting her head to side curiously, as if she was wondering whether his cough was because he was sick or some other reason. In the end, she shrugged and continued on with her previous train of thought. "I love watching TV, I can learn of all the things that happen in the outside world from it." "Outside world?" Naruto said in a questioning tone. The way she said that, so matter-of-factly, bothered him. The words themselves sounded somewhat ominous. They were the kinds of words he would expect a prisoner to use to describe the world beyond his cell. For some reason, the term caged bird came to his mind, but he banished the thought before it could take hold, and instead focused his attention on his Sekirei. How appropriate was it that the word Sekirei was Japanese for a type of bird called a wagtail? "I mean the world that you live in," she said, her eyes moving from the television to him. She smiled that smile that only she could. For some reason, it unnerved Naruto right now, rather than soothe him like it normally did. "We were born on an island where we were adjusted." Naruto's body stiffened. When Yusubi used the term adjusted, his mind couldn't help but conjure up the image of the young woman before him, strapped to a table as faceless people in lab coats experimented on her. He would have blamed it on playing too many video games and watching too much TV, but he was far too busy dealing with the white-hot rage that surged through his body at the thought of someone adjusting Yusubi. Thankfully, Naruto had a lot of experience when it came to masking his emotions, and thus managed to keep the anger out of his voice as he asked, "What exactly do you mean by adjusted?" "Newborn Sekireis can't adjust to the outside world and can't control their powers," Yusubi explained in a matter-of-fact tone. It almost sounded like she was giving a lecture, a thought which actually forced Naruto's anger away, as he gave a tiny snort of amusement. He was glad that Yusubi hadn't heard him as she continued talking. "An example would be every time we hug. If I couldn't control myself, you would have been turned into a pancake by now." The blonde relaxed a little, though the thought of someone adjusting, as Yusubi called it, another person sickened him. Her explanation had gone a long way to soothing his nerves. He still didn't like the thought, but it sounded to him like the Sekirei's adjustments were necessary in order to allow them to fit into human society. While the humans of his time might have been capable of dealing with an unadjusted Sekirei, the ones in this day and age were notoriously weak. He had no doubt that an unadjusted Yusubi really would have turned any human bar himself into a pancake as she hugged him. Then his mind recalled her last statement, and he gave a snort of amusement. "I'm a lot stronger than I look, Yusubi-chan. You know that." In emphasis, he tossed the lavesite a few inches above his hand, and caught it again with ease to emphasize that fact. He winked at the girl and said, "I think I could have withstood your hugs just fine, even if you couldn't control your powers." Yusubi giggled a little. "Well, maybe you could have, but most people wouldn't be able to survive a hug given by me, if I couldn't control my power." "So where is this island that you're talking about?" asked Naruto innocuously enough. A part of his mind was already making plans to infiltrate the island, so that he could learn as much as possible about Sekireis. Right now, he only knew the basics, and while that was fine for right now, if he wanted to plan his actions appropriately, he would need to know more about what he had gotten himself into. "It's an island called Kamigura, and it's a secret of MBI. It's not even on the map either." Her eyes widened, and she would have pressed a hand to her mouth were it not for the fact that she was carrying several hundred pounds worth of furniture. Oops. I wasn't supposed to say anything about that. "So basically no one but the higher-ups likely knows where this island is," Naruto said with a sigh. There went his plans of infiltrating the island to learn more about Sekirei, and this Sekirei plan that the MBI had spoken of. He put the thought into the back of his mind, storing it for a later time, just in case the knowledge became relevant again. To distract himself from his thoughts, Naruto looked back at the television and smiled. "So do you want to buy this TV as well?" Yusubi's eyes went white as she squealed in delight. "Ah, can I really?" "Of course, but you'll be carrying that one." Yada. They arrived at the Izumo Inn around 2 hours later. Stopping at the front door, Naruto raised his free hand and knocked on it exactly 3 times. He waited for me or one of the other residents to answer the door, listening as Yusubi shuffled impatiently behind him. It seemed she was eager to start decorating the room. The door was soon answered, not by Mia, but by the other female residents. Uzume was standing in the doorway, wearing a pair of form-fitting jeans that cut off at the knees and hugged her shapely hips like a second skin, and a tight-fitting purple shirt with a yellow star in the center of her chest. The shirt was very stretched as it expanded across her bust. It looked almost like it might rip at the seams. Equally clear was the fact that she was not wearing a bra of any kind. Her outfit was finished with a basic pair of sandals. She blinked at them, a dumb expression on her face as her eyes went from Yusubi and the large stack of furniture she was carrying to Naruto and his equally large stack of furniture. After several moments of her standing there looking like a lemon, she seemed to snap back into reality. Wow, she whistled as she glanced at the pair, though her eyes lingered thoughtfully on Naruto longer than they did Yusubi. You two are pretty strong, ain't ya? Of course. Yusubi cheered, and Naruto was sure that if it were not for the fact that she was carrying so many supplies, she would have pumped her fist into the air. That's because I'm Yusubi. Naruto cut the air-headed Sekirei off before she could incriminate herself as a Sekirei, and thus reveal her existence to someone who didn't know about the Sekirei plan. Yusubi looked at him curiously, her head tilting to the left, as she tried to understand why he had cut her off. It took her several seconds, and a lot of non-verbal cues that she couldn't understand, before she realized just why her Ashikabi had cut her off. Her eyes widened before, less than a second later, she giggled. Oops, sorry Naruto-sama. I almost forgot that you told Yusubi to be discreet. She knuckled the side of her head and stuck her tongue out. Teehee. Teehee, she says. Naruto sighed and resisted the urge to facepalm. How someone could be so scatterbrained was beyond him. His Sekirei seemed to take the term loose lip sync ship to a whole new, otherworldly level. It was almost ridiculous, just how bad she was at keeping secrets. He was just glad that there had been no point in time where Yusubi might be willing to talk about his powers. Uzume looked back and forth between the pair for a while longer, then shook her head and grinned. So is all this stuff for your room? She asked in an attempt to make conversation. At the same time she moved out of the way and held the door open, so that Naruto and Yusubi could enter the boarding house. Yep, Naruto said as he made his way inside. It took a bit of work, because he was carrying the items he had bought over his head. He needed to stoop slightly and bend his arm at a 45-degree angle, so it wouldn't smack against the wall above the doorway. Thankfully his natural grace, born and bred from years of living and his own surety with each movement he made, helped make the task easier. I just came to Shinto Tito a few days ago, so we don't have any furniture or anything for the room. I gotcha. Uzume was nodding as she walked backwards in front of the pair, her hands clasped behind her back. Then she blinked. So then wait, does that mean the two of you just met? And you're already moving in together? The busty brunette's look turned sly as a grin sprang onto her face. Damn bro, you work fast. What can I say? Naruto spoke in a pompous tone. It was too bad he was carrying so much crap around, or he would have been able to pretend to dust off his shoulder. When you've got it, you've got it. Uzume gawked open-mouthed at Naruto for a second, while Yusubi stared at the two in confusion. A second later, the star-wearing girl busted out in laughter, her hands coming around from behind her back to curling around her gut as she laughed. You're certainly not lacking in confidence, are you? Should I be? Asked Naruto, raising a single eyebrow at the girl. Not at all, Uzume assured him, taking one hand from her gut to wave it about her face, as if attempting to ward off a fly. It's just, wow, I really did not expect that. She began to regain her primary motor functions and straightened up, offering the blonde another grin. You know, I think I'm beginning to like you. Well, Naruto rolled his eyes. I'm glad to know how you feel about me. It really warms my heart to hear you say such things. Uzume's grin widened as she nodded her head once. As you should, it's not every day someone finds themselves in my favor. Naruto stifled a chuckle before deciding to switch topics. I didn't see you for breakfast this morning. Were you out late last night again? Yeah I was. Uzume rubbed the back of her head and laughed loudly. Naruto frowned, both the smile on her face and her laugh sounded forced. He would have asked her about it, but didn't want to be rude. It hadn't even been a full day since he had moved in, and while Uzume was an extremely likable person, and he was sure from their interaction just now that they would get on famously, it didn't change the fact that he hardly knew her. It simply wouldn't be right to intrude on her private life. Perhaps when they actually became friends he would ask her if there was something wrong. I didn't get in until, like, 2 this morning, Uzume continued, and Naruto's attention turned away from his thoughts to the girl in front of him. Wow, you must have been really busy last night, Uzume-san, Yusubi said with the brightest of smiles. While the naive Sekirei might have missed the grimace that the busty brunette gave at her words, Naruto was not one to miss such details. Once again, he stored the look and its possible meanings in the back of his mind. Yeah, I suppose you could say that, the star-wearing Sekirei said, absently bringing her left hand to clutch her right elbow. It was a posture that Naruto recognized from someone who didn't want to discuss whatever topic the current conversation was about. I actually just woke up a few seconds ago and was about to get a snack before you two came knocking on the door, carrying what looks like an entire house's worth of furniture like they were pillows. Naruto nodded his head at her explanation, putting his observations of her character in the back of his mind for later perusal. Well, don't let us keep you from your food. Exchanging final pleasantries, Uzumaki left for the kitchens, while Naruto and Musubi began making their way to the stairs. Just as they were about to try and figure out how they could make it up without losing some of the more loosely placed items, Miyu came walking downstairs with a duster in hand. I thought I heard you to come in, oh my. Miyu cut herself off mid-sentence, and brought a hand up to her mouth in mild surprise, as she saw how much the pair was carrying. She made her way all the way downstairs, and looked at the 2 large stacks of furniture they were carrying. Look at all this stuff you guys bought. Heh, well, we pretty much had to buy all the essentials, since neither of us have any furniture of our own. Naruto's eyes traveled up towards all of the stuff he was carrying above his head. He grimaced. Though, I think we may have ended up getting a few more items than necessary. The landlady gave him a warm smile that had a hint of amusement to it. It does look like you two bought quite a bit, she admitted, her perennial smile still in place. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure your room will be a lot homelier with some of the things you bought, even if they aren't necessarily needed to live. True, Naruto said with a nod and a smile. We managed to get a lot of nice furniture and appliances for our room. I think by the time we're done with setting everything up it will feel just like home. Well, that's good, the Perplet replied with her typical calm smile. She looked at the many furniture and items the pair were carrying with an amused expression. There was a slight gleam to her eyes, one that Naruto was surprised to recognize as something he had seen in his own eyes many times before the 4th grade Shinobi War had broken out. It was the mischievous and amused look he often had when something amused him, or he had played a successful prank. He could only hope Miyu wasn't the prankster type. I don't think I've seen anyone capable of lifting so many large and heavy objects at the same time. You two must be pretty strong. That's because I'm a fist-type Sekirei. Musubi replied in a cheerful voice before Naruto could tell her to keep her mouth shut. The blonde had to remind himself he was carrying a lot of heavy furniture, otherwise he would have face-palmed at the girl's inability to keep a secret. Hadn't he just got through doing his best to keep the girl from blurting that same secret out to Uzumaki? If this was how bad her memory was, then maybe it hadn't been such a good idea to reveal some of his abilities to the girl. Miyu, however, just giggled. You're so funny. It seemed she was willing to write the girl's comments off as an odd quirk. At least, that's what it looked like to the untrained eye. Naruto knew better, but decided not to say anything. He had just become a tenant at Maison Izumo, and didn't want to jeopardize his place there. It was hard enough finding an apartment that wasn't owned by MBI, but he also happened to like the traditional-looking Japanese house. So few places retained their architectural roots these days. He was brought out of his reverie when Miyu then looked over at him with an amused eye. And what about you? Are you a? She giggled again, fist-type Sekirei as well. No. I'm just awesome, Naruto said with a shrug, which caused the many items above his head to wobble. He cursed slightly, tilting his hand quickly and in various directions to correct the balance of weight in order to keep the objects from falling. He breathed a sigh of relief, only to pout when he heard Miyu giggling again, this time at him. Well then, I'll leave you two to get started, she told the pair. When you're done, why don't you come back downstairs for some tea? Thank you. Okay. The pair made their way upstairs, a more difficult task than the door. Because of the size of the items they were carrying, they were forced to take them up one at a time. Once done with it, they had to move them into their room. This again required more effort, as most of the items they had bought were too large to fit in through the doorway normally. Things like the table had to be turned on its side in order to get through, while the love seat had to be twisted at a 45-degree angle. The pair worked for somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes before they managed to get everything in the room. Alright, Naruto said, taking a deep breath and releasing it before he clapped his hands together. Getting everything set up and built is going to take some time, so let's get started. Musubi, why don't you begin by setting the couch wherever you want to sit when watching TV, then set up the table, the lamps and plants, and put the curtains up. While you do that, I'll build the dresser and the desk. Musubi gave the blonde a big smile. I would be happy to, Naruto-sama. The pair worked for another 2 hours, with Musubi setting up the furniture and Naruto building the pieces that were in the boxes. However, despite the amount of work it took, both felt their efforts were well worth the outcome. By the time they had finished, the room looked much more cozy, more like a well-lived-in home, than a sterile room whose sole saving grace was that it wasn't white. The desk had been placed in front of one of the windows, allowing whoever used it to look out at the horizon and the city beyond. Because the room was on the west side, they would be able to watch the sunset from it. The drawer had been placed in a corner of the room on the same side as the desk, and was being used as a TV stand. Just a few feet from it was the lavesiette, situated by the second window. The lamps they had bought were standing in 3 different places, one near the desk, another by the door, and the last in the corner with the television. The 2 plants were located in the 2 corners of the room on the other side, while the bed was still in the center. As a finishing touch, the blue curtains had been draped from the windows, adding what Naruto would consider a more feminine touch, since he honestly would have never even thought of buying the curtains if Musubi hadn't wanted them. Though he was truthfully surprised she had thought of them, given that she didn't seem to know much about the outside world. What do you think, Musubi-chan? asked Naruto as he looked at the woman beside him. It's perfect, Mitsubi said, beaming as she looked over the work she and her Ashikabi had done together. She looked over at him and her smile widened, reaching her eyes and conveying feelings of happiness and warmth. Don't you think so too, Naruto-sama? Naruto looked at the girl and smiled, something he had been doing a lot more often, since the odd and slightly naive Sekirei had come into his life. Yes, it is. Since they were done, the pair walked back downstairs, where they ran into Kagari wearing a long overcoat as he put on his shoes. Both of them looked at each other before looking back at the white-haired man who was walking towards the door. You heading out, Kagari? Asked Naruto, making the only other male living at Izumo Inn stop. He looked back at the pair standing on the last few steps and grimaced a bit, bringing up a hand to scratch his chest, before smiling. That's right, I've got a lot of work to do. Well, you're leaving early today, Miya said as she walked down from the hallway. Naruto and Mitsubi both turned their attention to her, along with Kagari. She gave a small pout. And I just made you dinner too. I'm sorry, Kagari apologized with a charming smile. I hate missing your delicious meals. Could you please leave some on the stove for me when I get home? He leaned down, kissed the perplexed hand, making the woman giggle. Take care, he said, waving to her and the other two as he left. Miya waved goodbye to Kagari before turning around to see Naruto and Mitsubi looking at her curiously. In case you were wondering, Kagari works nights at a host club. Really? Naruto said as he eyed the door that was just now closing. It clicked shut a few seconds later, and the blonde turned his attention back to Miya. I can't say I'm surprised. He's got that Bishonen look that a lot of women seem to be into nowadays down pat. Were it not for the white hair and the fact that Kagari was a lot nicer, the guy would have reminded him of Sasuke. A shudder escaped the blonde before he pulled himself together. I'm betting he's pretty popular with the ladies. He is, Miya agreed. He's apparently the most popular host over there. I think it's amazing. She looked back at Naruto and gave him a teasing wink, though, you're not bad looking yourself, Naruto-san. If you want, I bet you could speak with Kagari about getting a job there. I'm sure he would be more than happy to help you out. No thanks, Naruto said with a head shake. I'm not really interested in possible one-night stands anymore. Unbidden, his eyes traveled over to look at Mitsubi. He would freely admit that during his time on this earth the blonde had slept with numerous girls, so many in fact that he had lost count of the number of females he'd had sex with. How could he not? His refusal to get close to anyone had made it so that the most significant form of intimacy he could have was sex. But sleeping with someone just for sex was baseless, and he had only ever done it when he had an itch that needed to be scratched. Unlike his former sensei, Jiraiya, such acts usually left him feeling hollow afterwards. It's strange, now that I've found Mitsubi in my care, the idea of having sex simply for the sake of having sex feels wrong somehow. There it was again, that odd desire to be close to Mitsubi. He still couldn't pinpoint just where this desire came from, or how it came about so quickly. A part of him wanted to say that it was the moment he had winged her, their first kiss, but then he would be lying. The feelings had started before that, but he still couldn't figure out when. A part of him was bothered by that fact, while another part, a part that had been growing since Mitsubi's winging, told him to simply enjoy what life had just offered him. Oh my, Miya giggled. It sounds like someone's in love. Naruto paused, trying to come up with a more plausible explanation than love. It's not that. I just don't see the point in sleeping with someone for carnal pleasure when I have a person I know cares about me right here. Right, Mitsubi. Right? Mitsubi said with a nod. It was clear to both Naruto and Miya that the girl wasn't even paying attention to their conversation. She was still looking at the door, a finger pressed to her lips and a quizzical expression on her face. So, Kagari-san's a host. Yeah, Naruto said. He basically gets paid to lavish attention on women. Depending on the club, it can be a pretty lucrative business. Has Naruto-sama been a host before? Asked Mitsubi, looking over at him. I've been a host a fair few times during my travels, he admitted, a fair few being somewhere along the lines of 500 or 600, but they didn't need to know that. Sometimes when I was strapped for cash, or just wanted some extra spending money and didn't want to wait until I was paid. He grinned at the brunette. Why, interested in seeing what it would be like to have a good-looking guy do all those things for you. Yeah, especially if it's you, Mitsubi said, looking at him with her amber-colored eyes. I'd let you do anything to me. Naruto opened his mouth, closed it, blinked, then opened it again. After doing this for several seconds he sighed. You know, there are so many sexual connotations and innuendos I could say to that I'm not even sure which ones to use. Inwardly he thought, and I know for a fact that Mitsubi-chan doesn't even realize what those innuendos would mean, so saying them would be pointless. Mitsubi blinked and tilted her head to the side as she looked at the blonde curiously. Huh. Naruto sighed as his point was proven with that one little word. Meanwhile Miya giggled at the pair, drawing their attention to her. She smiled at the brunette and said, You look exhausted, would you like to take a bath before dinner? Yeah. I'd love that. Mitsubi said, throwing her hands into the air in her enthusiasm. Naruto and Miya actually shared a look before both began laughing, much to the brunette Sekirei's confusion. The bathhouse was on the first floor and was typical of a standard Japanese bath. made with a light blue tiling that spread out across the floor and 1/3 of the walls. The rest was made of wood made of a lighter grain. There was a large window which filtered light through the room, illuminating the rectangular wooden bath. It was of a decent size, about large enough to comfortably fit 4 or 5 people, and had a wooden platform sticking out of it. Off to the left was a small square plank of wood where the shampoo and soap was, along with a bucket that was used for washing. "Oh, wow. It looks fantastic," Musubi said with a brilliant smile. She looked at Naruto with a helpful expression. "If you want to join, I can wash your back." It was definitely her naivety talking again. The sexual connotations of a male and female taking a bath together were completely lost on the girl. "Sure," Naruto said, agreeing with her even though he knew this. Whatever else could be said about the blonde, he was still a hot-blooded male, and the offer of taking a bath with someone who was easily a 10 on the hotness scale was not something he would pass up. "I haven't been in an actual bath like this for a long time, and it will be nice to relax. I'll even help you wash your back as well." The smile that split Musubi's face at his words lit up the entire room. The pair quickly shed their clothing, folding them neatly and finding an empty cubbyhole to put them in. Naruto looked over at Musubi and took a moment to admire her form. In his long life, the blonde had seen and been with many beautiful women. Of those he had met, it had always been the first women he had known that he felt were the most beautiful. There had simply been something about the kunoichi in his life that the civilian girls he slept with just couldn't compare to. However, seeing Musubi as she stripped down, Naruto had to amend his statement. The girl had all the firm and lean muscle mass that a kunoichi had, along with the softness one would expect from a civilian supermodel. There was also the small, or large depending on your perspective, fact that the girl had some of the largest breasts he had ever seen in his life. He had to wonder if they were something unique to her, or if all Sekirei just had an abnormally large bosom. They were so large that even the slightest of movements caused them to shake and shudder in ways that left the blonde's pants feeling incredibly tight. As things stood, he wasn't wearing pants anymore, and only the most supreme command of wills kept his body from giving into its natural response. Shaking the thought away, Naruto finished taking off his own clothes and folded them in an empty cubbyhole. He walked into the room with Musubi and followed the girl as she made her way over to the small stool that stood off to the side of the steaming tub. Right next to it was a bucket and some soap and shampoo used for washing. Musubi gave Naruto a bright smile as she said, "Why don't you sit down, Naruto-sama, and I'll start washing your back." After a moment's pause, Naruto replied with an affirmative sure before sitting down on the designated stool. Musubi stooped down to grab the bucket, then went over to the tub and filled it with weight. When she returned, it was to pour the bucket's contents of steaming liquid on her Ashikabi. As the warm water ran down his body, the sound of 2 hands rubbing together let him know that Musubi was lathering either soap or shampoo on her hands. He guessed it was the shampoo since the soap was in the form of a bar, and not the liquid body wash that most people use these days. Moments later, a pair of delicate and feminine fingers ran through his hair. Naruto stiffened under their touch for only a moment before letting his body relax. It wasn't long before the blonde actually found himself enjoying the girl's ministrations, the way her fingernails lightly scraped against his scalp, marveling at how deceptively soft her hands were. He knew from seeing her carry her stack of furniture that she was strong, so it was definitely a surprise when he found out that her hands held none of the calloused hardness that came from intense training and work. Then again, she had lived in a lab up to this point, so maybe it wasn't so hard to believe. He closed his eyes as the girl behind him once more got a bucket of water and used it to wash the shampoo out of his hair, then began washing his back. Deciding to do some washing himself, Naruto grabbed one of the extra bars of soap and began scrubbing his arms and chest. As he cleaned himself, he listened to Musubi's gentle humming and let his mind wander. How long had it been since he had been with a woman like this? Had he ever actually bathed with a female before? It was hard to remember all of the things he had done. Sometimes the centuries tended to blur together after a time. The only thing his mind ever deigned to remember were important events in history that he had lain witness to, and considering he went out of his way to avoid those moments, only a few of them really stuck out. To be honest, the times that were clearest in his mind was back before his life had become the curse it was, when he had been nothing more than a shinobi of Konoha. Perhaps that was because the times back then were simpler, or maybe because those times held more meaning. After all, he held no attachment to the world or the people now living in it. These people, who were so ignorant of their ancestors' past, of the hardships that had been faced so they could continue living in relative peace, they were not people he cared for. It had been a long time since Naruto ever actually cared about anyone aside from himself. His introspection was brought to a halt as another bucket full of water was dumped on him. "There," Musubi said in a proud tone, and while Naruto could not see it, he could almost feel the smile on his Sekirei's face. "Your back's all clean, Naruto-sama." Without even realizing it, a smile appeared on his face as the ghosts of his past receded into the back of his mind. Standing up, Naruto turned to face the woman he found himself bonded to. "Thanks, Musubi-chan. Would like me to wash your back now?" "Yes. Musubi would love that." The excitable Sekirei shouted, reverting to the more childish form of speaking to herself in third person. She bounded over to the stool and plopped herself down. Naruto couldn't help but grin as he saw the girl squirming with a combination of excitement and impatience. Retrieving the empty bucket, Naruto copied Musubi's earlier actions and went over to the tub, scooping out a bucket full of water, and pouring it over Musubi when he walked back over. He began the process of washing Musubi's hair, dropping a nickel-sized dollop of shampoo on his hands, rubbing them together until the soap had formed a thick foam, and then messaging the now foamy substance into Musubi's hair. As Sekirei let out a loud sigh and her posture slumped, letting him know just how relaxed his actions were making her. It was good to see that even though he was slightly out of his element here, some of the techniques he had learned when it came to pleasing women still applied. The process of washing Musubi's hair and then her back was surprisingly short, or perhaps he had just lost track of time. It was strangely comforting to help the girl wash herself. When he finished, Naruto stood up and took a single step back. Now that we're both cleaned up, why don't we enjoy some time relaxing in the tub? No. Musubi responded to his question in the way he was beginning to suspect was something of a trademark for her, a loud squeal of affirmation, as she threw her hands up in the air, before she rushed over to the tub. Or at least tried to. Careful, Naruto said as Musubi slipped on the wet floor. She would have fallen were it not for him catching her. There's no need to rush, he told her as he helped the girl steady herself. The tub isn't going anywhere. Sorry, Naruto-sama, Musubi replied with an excited smile, not at all bothered by the fact that she had almost fell flat on her face. I'm just so excited. The lab didn't have any baths. We just used showers. Ah, well, I can understand why you're excited then. And he could. The idea of actually being able to relax in a tub of warm water was definitely an enjoyable one. It was, in fact, one of the few things in life that Naruto was able to appreciate. But that doesn't mean you should be reckless. You could have seriously hurt yourself. I'm sorry, Musubi moaned piteously. She gave him a pleading look. Can we please go in the bath now? Alright, Naruto relented, feeling he had reprimanded the girl enough. It was clear she was barely listening anyways, probably still too excited by thoughts of a warm bath to really pay too much attention. Following words with actions, Naruto stepped into the steaming tub without a moment's hesitation, Musubi right behind him. The water was hot enough that the blonde actually got slight burns as he sunk down in the water. However, the burning healed up a second later with no adverse effects, not even a red mark to signify that he had been burned. Hot. Musubi hissed as she dipped her toe into the water. Naruto chuckled as he watched her get in much more slowly than he had. Granted, she didn't have his healing factor, and she likely hadn't dealt with the kind of painful circumstances he had often found himself in when he was younger, so her pain tolerance probably wasn't up to par with his own. Are you okay? Asked Naruto as Musubi dipped her toe in again before fully moving into the water. Yeah, the water was just hotter than I expected, Musubi said. She winced a little more as she lowered herself into the bath. However, as she immersed herself more fully into the hot water, her body began to adapt. As a Sekirei, she had a stronger tolerance than most humans, and her body healed much faster from wounds as well. She was genuinely surprised that Naruto didn't seem to have any trouble dealing with the hot water. She looked over at her Ashikabi and smiled. Naruto was leaning against the tub with his eyes closed and a small smile on his face. He looked really relaxed and completely at ease. Seeing him look so content made her heart soar. Naruto felt her looking at him and opened his eyes to watch her in turn. He gave her a smile and said, "See anything you like, Musubi-chan." "Of course, Naruto-sama. It's nice to see you so relaxed like this," Musubi said with a smile that was so innocent that if the blonde didn't know any better, he would have thought it wasn't real. He did sweat drop at her for not even getting the slight innuendo, but quickly realized that he shouldn't have expected anything less. "I don't think I've ever seen you this happy." She pressed a hand to her chest. "I can actually feel your happiness right here, and it's beautiful." For such a naive girl, she tends to make some really insightful comments, the blonde thought with an internal chuckle. He looked at the girl with a soft smile before a small frown came over him. Now that he was no longer admiring the girl, at least, no longer admiring her any more than was natural, he noticed that her shoulders and back were a little tense. Too tense to be natural. Long experience with his own body, and its functions told him that she probably had several knots that had been built up in her body. Most likely due to the fact that she had only just been released from the lab she had been living at, and already been forced into running combat with those lightning twins before she met him. "Come over here, Musubi-chan," he said, gesturing her over. The girl looked at him for a moment before smiling and doing as told. He directed her to sit between his legs with her back to him. With just a moment's hesitation, Naruto placed his hands on her shoulder and began to utilize skills that had been cultivated by years of experience to bring Musubi incredible pleasure. The word was extended to incredible lengths as Musubi let loose a long breath. Her entire body seemed to slump in on itself as Naruto began kneading her muscles and removing some of the knots that were in her back. "That feels so good." I'm glad you think so, Naruto said as he used his pointer and middle finger, along with some precise chakra control, to work out a particularly tight knot in Usubi's thoracolumbar fascia. I noticed that you were pretty tense, you've got a lot of knots in your back, and that can hinder you while you're in a fight. This should help keep you limber. It became clear to Naruto when Usubi released a long sigh of content that she was no longer listening. Shaking his head in mild amusement, Naruto began to hum a soft tune he remembered learning during his lifelong journey. He couldn't remember where it was from, but suppose that didn't really matter. When you're as old as I am, things like the who's, what's, where's, how's, when's and why's simply stop being an issue, he thought to himself, a little sadly. Thinking of my age makes me wonder if becoming Usubi-chan's Ashikabi was a mistake. Will she live as long as me? Or will the ravages of time take her like it did everyone else? That had always been his biggest fear, and the reason he never got close to another person after the time of the hidden villages had passed. He simply didn't think he could survive the heartbreak of losing someone he loved. Thinking of his past, and the precious people he lost caused Naruto to stop giving Usubi her message. Beginning to feel overcome by emotions and a fear he hadn't felt in a long time, the blonde wrapped his arms around the brunette Sekirei's waist, and pulled her flush against him, confusing the girl greatly. Naruto-sama, she asked, turning her head to try and look at him. He was, unfortunately for her, resting his head against the center of her back, so she couldn't quite see him other than his spiky blonde locks that spilled over her shoulder. But considering their bond, he wouldn't be surprised if she could feel his emotions. Why? Why now? Why was he losing control over his emotions like this? He had gone thousands of years before now without ever once letting himself feel the true depths of his own despair or any sort of hopelessness. So why was it that he now felt so incredibly vulnerable? Was it the girl? Could her presence be invoking this emotion? He supposed it was possible, but the answer couldn't be that simple. Maybe it was his fear of how close she was getting to him. After all, hadn't he avoided forming attachments with others so he wouldn't hurt when they died? Yet in just 2 days, this girl had wormed her way into his heart, and now he was afraid of what might happen to him if, no, when, she died. After all, the only thing that seemed to last forever in this world was him. Are you alright? Usubi's question snapped Naruto out of his slight fugue, though he was still feeling unusually vulnerable. Perhaps that was why he said what he said next. Promise me you'll never leave me, Naruto whispered in a soft voice. Just hearing that tone in her Ashikabi's voice made Usubi feel terrible. The fact that she could feel the emptiness in the blonde's heart, like a void that had been sucking out his soul for who knew how many years, only made it worse. The person she now cherished most was suffering, and she didn't know why or how to truly help. Shifting her body around in his grasp, Usubi set her legs over one of Naruto's, as she moved until her profile was being presented to him. She looked into the blonde's eyes, which were much more vulnerable than she was used to seeing in the past 3 days since they had met. Not really sure how to reassure him but wanting to do something, the brunette Sekirei cut the blonde's face with her hands and pulled him into a kiss. Her wings flared out behind her as the power the blonde held entered her body. The phantasmagorical wings of energy pushed the water away from her back, sending some of his splashing over the sides, as the 2 great appendages of energy unfolded. She did her best to ignore it, along with the pleasure and heat it brought her, as she focused on pouring all of her emotions into the kiss. In response, Naruto's arms tightened their hold around her waist, as if to keep her from disappearing. When they broke the kiss, Usubi gave Naruto a soft smile. I will never leave you, Naruto-sama, she told him in a completely sincere voice. I will always stay by your side as your Sekirei, now and forever. Not even the professor will be able to take me from you. Usubi, thank you, Naruto said, feeling tears run from his eyes. He cursed himself for his weakness. This wasn't like him. He wasn't this weak. Or at least, he shouldn't be. But Usubi's words, no, her very presence struck a chord with him, brought him a small measure of comfort in a world that was no longer his. He had been alone for so long that the girl's words simply made him feel more emotional than he would have otherwise. You don't need to thank me, Naruto-sama, Usubi said with a soft smile. I want to be with you. I was simply telling the truth. I know that, Naruto said. He closed his eyes and shook his head, willing both his tears and his weakness back into the darkest reaches of his mind, where they would hopefully never see the light of day again. When he opened his blue orbs again, it was with a cheerful smile that held none of the vulnerability he had a few seconds ago. Still, I appreciate it. Usubi's smile, impossible as it seemed, brightened at his words. You're welcome. While Naruto and Usubi were having their small bonding moment, Uzumaki, who had been peeking from the doorway when she heard voices inside of the bathhouse, closed the door and sighed. I guess I can wait until they're done to take my bath, she said with a smile. I wouldn't want to ruin their moments. After getting redressed, she walked back out of the changing room and up the stairs to her own room. It was early the next morning that Naruto woke up. For the second time in 2 days, the blonde found himself being roused from grogginess with an unfamiliar weight on him. One might think it strange, but Uzumaki Naruto, despite being the kind of person who woke up before the crack of dawn, was not a morning person. During the early years of his childhood, and on through his genin days, Naruto had always had trouble waking up early in the morning. He'd even needed to go through an entire wake-up process just to get himself started. This usually consisted of him stumbling out of bed and into the kitchen, then staring at the fridge for a full 15 minutes before opening it and beginning breakfast, which oftentimes consisted of a piece of stale toast and some spoiled milk. After that he would get dressed and, by some miracle, would be awake and ready to start the day. At the time, he hadn't known that it was just Kurama's incredible energy that had given him the kickstart he needed to get going. It hadn't been until his training trip with Jiraiya that Naruto had truly begun to appreciate getting up at the crack of dawn. Jiraiya, for all his false and lecherous intent towards women, had been a good teacher. As soon as the first few rays of light hit whatever clearing they had slept in that night, or shone in through the window, he would get the blonde up, so they could start their morning spar. This wake-up call most often included Naruto getting a gallon or so of freezing cold water dumped on him. It had taken a while, and Naruto complained quite a bit during that time, but eventually the blonde began getting up on his own, without needing Jiraiya's special wake-up call. After all, no one wanted to get a bucket of ice-cold water dumped on them. Despite the fact that Naruto's body was now naturally inclined to wake up before the sun had even begun to rise, a habit that he had simply never bothered getting rid of, it still took him several minutes before his mind properly rebooted. Sometimes he would just lay on his futon, or the bed of whichever hotel he was in, blinking as he let his brain restart. Which was fine with him, it wasn't like he had anything to do nowadays. There was no need for training, all of his enemies were dead. It wasn't like he had anyone waiting for him, and even if he had, he doubted they would be awake at the crack of fucking dawn. Truth be told, aside from habit, Naruto didn't know why he still bothered waking up so early. Perhaps it was a way to honor his fallen sensei. He didn't know, and a part of him didn't want to know for fear of where his thoughts might take him. Surprisingly enough, Naruto was not quite as tired this morning as he usually was. He chalked this up to the fact that he hadn't had any nightmares last night, something that could only be a good thing in his book. It probably had something to do with the weight of the very warm pillow cuddled into his side. The very warm pillow that made very slight movements as it breathed in and out, releasing cute snores with every breath. Wait a minute. Blinking, Naruto tilted his head down to see just what the pillow snuggling against him was. The first thing he was greeted with was a head of brown hair. The second thing was the angelic face of the beautiful girl that was currently drooling on his chest, followed by a body that the goddesses themselves would be jealous of. A body that was currently as bare as the day it was born. Naruto suppressed a groan as his mental faculties began coming online and cataloging many of the feelings he had not taken notice of in his half-dead state. The very first of those things, which just so happened to be the girl's breasts as they pressed against his bare chest, the way her nipples rubbed against his skin with each breath she took. This was followed by the curves of the brunette's body, luscious and beautiful curves that were both toned from what looked like years of training, but what Naruto somehow instinctively knew she had just been born with, and soft in a way that would put any supermodel to shame. More aspects began making themselves known to the blonde, like how her left leg had hooked itself over his legs. How she must have been rubbing against him sometime during the night, because he had a stain on his boxers that he knew from their position relative to his own sex organ, was not of his own make. To the way her hand had sometime during the middle of the night snaked its way into his boxers, and was grasping his tool in a firm grip. That last one in particular caused him to nearly blow his load. Dear God, did this girl know what she was doing to him? Doing his best to not let loose a very manly scream of surprise, and now very awake and heavily aroused Naruto did his best to extract himself from Usubi's grip. This proved to be a lot harder than he thought it would, as it seemed like the girl quite enjoyed holding him close. Each time he tried to pull her arms from around his chest, or shift her leg until it was no longer wrapped around his own, she would tighten her hold on him to a painful extent. Naruto actually found himself wincing when he heard several ribs crack painfully during one particularly hard squeeze. Well, if he ever wanted to know what it would be like to be a teddy bear for someone like Tsunade, this would probably be an accurate comparison. Honestly, how Jiraiya could possibly the idea of getting with that woman was fun was beyond him. If this was even half as bad as a Tsunade hug would be, then he didn't even want it to know what the real deal would feel like. Thankfully, Usubi's bear hugs had the effect of calming his raging libido. If nothing else, he could be thankful for that. It took a number of minutes, and some very careful maneuvering before Naruto managed to remove himself from Usubi's grip. It seemed that his Sekirei was quite content while she held onto him, and was loath to let him out of her grasp. Whenever he tried to pry her arms off him, she would tighten her hold to unbearable levels in turn, oftentimes letting out a noise of discontent at his attempts at removing himself from her. Really, the girl's hugs were quite painful. He would have substituted himself with a clone, but considering it would likely pop the moment it entered the brunette Sekirei's bone-crushing hug, decided against it. After finally managing to extract himself from Usubi's grasp, the blonde made his way downstairs. It was still very early in the morning, the sun was only just coming up, peeking out beyond the horizon and painting orange and purple streaks across the sky. No one else was awake yet as far as he could see while he walked through the house. Even Mia seemed to be asleep, or at least still in her room. Thinking of the plans he wanted to do today, the blonde headed over for the kitchen. The kitchen was fairly average, much like the rest of the house. It held a marble countertop, with several drawers and cupboards lining the bottom, and a few more cupboards above. There was a gas stove and oven combination, several appliances one would expect to find in a kitchen, a refrigerator, a microwave and the sink. There were several windows lining the walls, allowing light to filter into the room, and a table that could seat 4 people in the center. With a slight smile, the blonde got to work. His first task was finding the pots and pans, then searching for the ingredients: eggs, flour, milk, bacon, broth, seasoning, butter, various assorted vegetables and some chicken. He separated the groceries into 2 piles, placed a pan on the stove and turned on the heat. Naruto placed some butter on the pan, and while waiting for it to melt, grabbed a bowl, and began mixing the ingredients he had in the first pile into it. He wasn't sure how much flour he would need, but shrugged and placed 4 cups inside, then cracked 6 eggs, poured in some milk, added a pinch of sugar, a small amount of yeast, some baking powder, salt, butter, and several dozen blueberries he found in the fridge. He began stirring the food, mixing it until it was completely even with no chunky parts to it, then set it aside as he noticed the butter was beginning to melt in the pan, and used a spatula to even it amongst the pan's surface. When he was sure the pan was hot enough to cook something in, he grabbed the bowl and began pouring in some of the batter. Knowing it would take a few minutes for the first side to bake, Naruto began working on the second pile. His first step was creating more batter, though this was for a completely different purpose than pancakes. With the sort of expertise one would expect of a professional chef, the blonde shinobi began to mix and whisk ingredients into another bowl much faster than when he had with the first one. Once he was finished with his mixing, he set the bowl aside and got back to the pancakes, so he could let the dough set. As he worked, humming a small tune to himself, another person who had just woken up quietly entered the room, and began to watch the blonde in idle curiosity. Mia watched as the blonde man went about the kitchen with the confidence of one who had been looking after themselves for a long time. She watched as he switched off between making the pancakes until all of the batter from the first bowl was gone. Then kneading the dough from the second bowl on a wooden cutting board he had found in one of the cupboards, the surety of his movements letting her know that this was a task he had performed possibly hundreds of times in the past. "I wonder what he is making," she wondered to herself as she watched him. Mia would admit to being a curious individual, especially when it came to an anomaly like Naruto. While she had not known the blonde for very long, it was as she had told Kagari when the mysterious blonde in Musubi had asked for a place to live. There was just something about the blonde that drew her curiosity, and told her he was a trustworthy individual. It was something that words alone could not ascribe to, the feeling she got when looking at Naruto. New movement from the blonde drew her attention away from her own thoughts. She was actually surprised when he began throwing the dough over his head, going through a complex series of stretches and twirls. Before dispersing the dough through the air that pulled it out until it was taut enough that Mia was sure it would snap. It almost looked like it had become elastic as the blonde waved it about, and the perplete watched as her house's news tenon flipped, stretched, and intertwined the dough, before it suddenly separated itself into numerous strands. It was an extremely impressive feat, to be sure. She had never seen someone make food in such a dramatic and skillful manner. Hopefully, she would have the opportunity to ask him if he could teach her how to do that. It might not be a useful skill, designed more for showboating than anything else from the looks of it, but she couldn't deny that the process he used looked, well, fun. So he's making some kind of noodle dish, she thought to herself as she continued watching. He's very talented. I don't think I've ever seen noodles being made that way before. Those moves looked almost like some kind of complicated dance, and I can tell from the way his muscles are built that he's not a chef by profession. He looks more like a fighter of some kind, but it's obvious he knows how to cook. Probably from his travels. But I wonder why I feel that there's so much more to him than just what he told us last night. While it wasn't in her nature to question others, she couldn't help but be curious about E-Blonde. For every answer she seemed to get about him, she received several more questions. Granted, she had only met him 2 nights ago, which could explain why she knew so little about him. It didn't change the fact that whenever he spoke, Mia got the feeling that he was using some form of doublespeak to say one and mean something else. It was the kind of talking one did when they didn't want to tell someone the truth, but at the same time didn't want to lie, so instead they told a half-truth that would ensure no one could question them on the sincerity of their words. Uzumaki and Kagari might have missed that bit about their new tenant, but Mia had been around people who spoke like that before. Despite this and the fact that the last person who spoke in a similar manner was someone she hated, Mia did not sense any ill intent from the blonde. Indeed, it seemed more like he was hiding himself out of habit, rather than because he thought it was entertaining to watch the people around him get angry. And she had to admit that the mystery she was positive surrounded Naruto brought an interesting element to the otherwise dull life that had been hers since her husband died. It wasn't until she caught the scent of miso soup when the blonde began cooking that Mia recognized what he was making. Deciding that she had watched him enough, and feeling just mildly embarrassed that she had watched him for so long, Miyu decided to make her presence known. "I didn't know you could cook, Naruto-san," she said loud enough for him to hear. The blonde turned his head to look at her, and she was again mildly surprised when he didn't seem surprised to see her standing in the doorway. If anything, she got the distinct impression that he had known she was there all along, and just waiting for her to announce herself. How curious. "Good morning, Miyu-chan," he called out in a happy voice. The blonde looked to be in a good mood today, and she couldn't keep the slight giggle from escaping her at his apparent new suffix for her. It seemed that since they were living together, her newest tenant had decided on a more affectionate term of suffix. The use of the suffix chan is a diminutive suffix. It expresses that the speaker finds a person endearing. In general, chan is used, but is not limited to babies, young children, grandparents and teenage girls. It may also be used towards cute animals, lovers, close friends, and a youthful woman, or even between friends. Considering she was none of those things, at least not yet, and on top of that she could technically be considered as superior since Maize and Izumo belonged to her, the use of that suffix would have normally been considered condescending and rude in this instance. While such a situation may have earned him her ire had it been anyone else, Miyu got the distinct impression that he used the less formal suffixes for everyone he knew. Thus, she decided to just let the instance go. Besides, if nothing else, his use of attaching such a suffix on her was amusing. Shaking the mundane thoughts of suffixes and Naruto's use of them away, the lavender eyed the food he was making with an interesting gaze, before turning her attention back towards the blonde himself. "I was going to make breakfast, you know," Miyu said with a mild pout. While she had not always been a very humorous individual, in fact some people she knew back in the day would call her downright scary, the purple-haired beauty did have her fun side, something that she thanked her late husband for. "You're stealing my job from me." Naruto gave her an easygoing grin, the look coming to his face so naturally that it was actually kind of surprising, and not just to Miyu. "I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention. I was actually just planning on making some ramen for today, and decided that I would make breakfast as well. Having moved around as much as I have, and having been making food for myself for many years, I'm a pretty good chef." "I noticed, I was watching you," Miyu admitted without a hint of her earlier embarrassment. It was a talent she possessed thanks to her earlier profession. It was not something she was particularly proud of, the things she had done in her earlier life, but it wasn't something she let bother her either. She just didn't let the thoughts bother her for too long. "I know," Naruto chuckled at the mild amount of surprise she displayed upon his statement. "I have something of a sixth sense that lets me know when I'm being watched." Miyu accepted his answer, even though she knew there was more to it than that. If he had sensed her when she had entered the room, he must have incredible spatial awareness, a must-have for people trained in combat. It seemed her earlier estimation of Naruto was correct, and he was turning out to be a very interesting individual. Deciding to change the subject as she was not quite sure Naruto would reveal anything truly relevant about himself as she asked right now, Miyu focused on something else. She looked over at the broth he was making and couldn't help but ask, "So what did you need to make ramen for?" "I plan on taking Misubi-chan out for a picnic," Naruto informed her. He frowned for a second, his eyes flickering uncertainly before he pressed on. I haven't really had a chance to spend so much time with anyone else before meeting her, what with all the traveling I do. So I figured it would be nice to do something other couples did." Miyu raised an eyebrow. Both had his seeming reluctance to admit to having not spent much with other people, and his hesitance to admit he and Misubi were a couple. Did that mean he was still unsure about his relationship with the excitable Sekirei? It was possible, she supposed. After all, Naruto was human, even Takedo had taken his relationship with her far too slow for her tastes, and she was different than the other 107 Sekireis. Putting her curiosity of the man's words aside, she focused on something a little less invasive. There would be a time to learn more about the man before her later. "So you made ramen for a picnic?" she asked, an amused smile playing on her face as she held the left sleeve of her kimono to hide her mouth. "You can never go wrong with ramen," the blonde defended his favorite noodle dish. "How do you plan on keeping it warm?" she asked, and was only mildly surprised when he gave her a mysterious smile. She had actually been expecting it. Last night at dinner when Uzumaki had asked him how he had traveled to so many different countries, despite only being 19, Naruto had given her that same smile. Miyu even had an idea on what he was about to say, a theory which was confirmed a second later. "Oh, I have my ways," he said, chuckling again when she pouted at the expected response. Then he blinked, his eyes flickering for a moment as he seemed to realize something important. He looked at me again, this time with a sheepish smile. "Speaking of picnics, do you know of any good parks I can go to for one? I haven't been in town very long, and that time was spent trying to find an apartment and clothes shopping for Misubi-chan." "Of course," Miyu said, taking on a thinking pose with a hand under her chin and her other hand holding up her elbow. "Normally, I would suggest the botanical garden. However, the undergrowth is still going strong. I hear it's gotten so bad that MBI might actually begin stepping in." There was a hint of distaste when Miyu mentioned MBI, something the blonde took note of and placed in the back of his mind for later thought. Naruto frowned for a moment, but nodded. So where else would you suggest? Well, there's a small park about a mile east of the garden, she suggested. It's small, but nice. I think you and Musubi-chan will love it. Then that's where we'll go. Naruto cheered, causing Miyu to giggle, as the blonde's enthusiasm reminded her of Musubi's. She wondered for a second if perhaps the excitable young woman he had bonded to was affecting him just as much as he likely was her. It wasn't something she had realized was possible, but then again, Naruto was an interesting character, so perhaps what was impossible for most Ashikabis was quite possible for him. When he calmed down, the shinobi looked over at her and asked, "Do you want to come with us?" "Oh my," Miyu held a hand to her cheek as she put on a look of mild surprise. "Should I be worried about you asking a poor, widowed woman like myself on a date with another girl? I'm not going to have to fend off your lustful urges, am I?" Lustful urges? Naruto blinked at the term. "What are you?" He trailed off and shook his head. "Never mind, I don't want to know." Now it was Miyu's turn to giggle at the blonde while he gave her a pout. With a shake of his head, the blonde seemed to dispel his previous faux indignation, and gave the Lavenderetto look. "And I wasn't hating on you, I was simply trying to be polite." He gave his head a sharp nod, as if to reaffirm himself of his thoughts just as much as Miyu. Teasing done with for the moment, Miyu smiled in appreciation of the offer, but shook her head. "I wouldn't want to intrude upon yours and Musubi-chan's date like that." "You wouldn't impose," Naruto said adamantly. Miyu blinked at the tone, but he continued before she could comment on it. "And I think Musubi-chan would love having another girl to talk to." "Well, maybe, she doesn't seem to be your average female, so it's hard to say." He paused, his eyes regarding her with a look of intense scrutiny. Miyu felt her shoulders stiffen slightly at that look, a part of her wondering why she suddenly felt so vulnerable. "Then again, you don't seem to be your average woman either." "Oh?" Miyu shifted again, forcing her shoulders to relax as she adopted a look of idle curiosity. And she would admit to being curious, wondering just what it was that he saw in her. Another part, however, was thinking on whether or not she would have to kill him. "And just what makes you say that?" "You're too graceful," he said, making her raise an eyebrow. He seemed to sense her confusion and decided to elaborate further by saying, "What I mean is your movements hold a grace that very few people can achieve. Only warriors of the highest caliber have the kind of movements you do, meaning you've been in more than a few life and death battles." The blonde paused for a moment, blinking. "That, or you could just be a dancer. Talented dancers are pretty graceful too." Though a sweat drop formed on her head at his last comment, the blonde's first words actually caused a few alarms to go off in her head. That was a very keen observation. Even more incredible was the fact that he had made it after having only met her 2 days ago. Being able to note details like that and make an accurate estimation about a person from them was a talent that few people had. Miyu could do it, of course, but even then it took time before she was able to truly make such an accurate guess. The good example would be the first time she had met Naruto. She had known the moment she laid eyes on him that there was something different about the blonde, something that drew her to him, made her want to trust him, reach out to him. She just couldn't for the life of her figure out what that was at the time, and even now a part of her was still having trouble determining just why she felt this way. Naruto, on the other hand, seemed to have made an accurate estimation of her skills as a warrior within a short amount of time, and if her guess was right, had made those beliefs during their very first meeting. The only thing she could conclude from this was that Naruto would require careful watching in the future. Despite her shock, Miyu managed to keep herself calm as she addressed the blonde who was just putting the finishing touches on his food. "Knowing this, you must have some experience in battle yourself." "Too many," Naruto agreed, sighing as he suddenly seemed to age before her eyes. Not in the physical sense, but more in the spiritual sense. It was all in his eyes. They looked so tired, like he had lived for far too long, and a part of him had given up and was just waiting to die. It was enough to shock whatever wariness Miyu might hold towards Naruto out of her. Her hand twitched, and it was only her own superb reflexes that allowed her to keep the offending appendage from being placed on Naruto's shoulder. She shook her head. Where had that come from? For a moment there she had been tempted to offer a man she had barely met the comfort of her presence. Well, it was not completely out of character for her to do, helping others out that is, she had never willingly touched another male before. Not before her husband had died and certainly not after. Yet that had been exactly what she had been about to do. It wasn't so much her arm moving against her will, as it was her arm moving before she even realized it was moving. That more than anything was what shocked her. Dragging her attention away from her surprise at her own almost actions, she turned to look at Naruto. The look between now and the past half a second she had seen him showed a remarkable difference. And between the time she had watched him age before her eyes, he had somehow managed to pull himself together through an act of sheer will. The moment of weakness from before gone as if it had never existed in the first place. Almost unbidden, Miyu felt her respect for the man rise several notches. What kind of strength must someone possess to pull themselves together like that? And what must he have suffered to even gain such a look in the first place? There were questions she didn't have an answer to. There were also questions she realized she had no business asking. Perhaps when they knew each other better, but not now. For a second the two stared at each other, neither of them seemed to know what to do. Miyu was sure that Naruto had not missed her reaction to his moment of weakness, a man that observative was more than capable to taking in great detail, even when they themselves were in turmoil. It also looked like his own moment was keeping him from saying anything. Miyu could understand where he was coming from, she currently felt the same way. Fortunately for both of them, the tense moment was soon broken by someone else who knew nothing of what had just transpired entering the room. Musubi continued walking further into the kitchen, her nose sniffing as she followed the scent of Naruto's cooking. She seemed completely unaware of the thick knife-cutting tension that permeated the two before her. In fact, she didn't even seem to realize that there were two more people in the room. "It smells so good in here," she mumbled sleepily, her stomach rumbling and a small amount of drool coming out of her mouth as she took in the scent. Her words and the rumbling of the black hole Musubi called the stomach broke the tension that had built up between Miya and Naruto. The two looked at each other, then at the brunette whose stomach rumbles had just rocked the house. A few seconds later, Miya gracefully hid her mouth behind the sleeve of her kimono. Ifufufufu. Naruto was not far behind as he gave his own amused chuckles. Hee. As the two continued to laugh and/or giggle, Musubi glanced from one laughing face to the other in adorable confusion, her head slightly cocked to the left. Thank you so much for taking me out on a picnic, Naruto-sama. I've never been on a picnic before, Musubi said as she held onto his arm with both of hers. Naruto did his best to ignore the feeling of the naive woman's abnormally large bosom, as his appendage was pressed in between the glorious mounds of her cleavage. Did this girl really not have a clue about what her actions did to him? They had left an hour after breakfast, picnic basket in hand, and journeyed to the park that Miya had given Naruto directions to. It had taken a while to get there, nearly 2 hours because they had decided to go for a more scenic route, wandering through the streets and exploring more of the city. Musubi hadn't complained thankfully. In fact, she seemed just as taken in with the sights as Naruto was, though their reasons for taking in the city were most probably vastly different from each other. Having only been in the city for 3 days, Naruto had wanted to gain a measure of the city, and create his own internal map so he wouldn't get lost. It also allowed for him to observe potential ambush sites and choke point that he could use to great effect if he decided to go with utilizing guerrilla tactics against other Ashikabi in their Sekirei. Musubi on the other had been on the run from the S&M girls, along with who knew how many other Sekirei that went after unwinged Sekirei, from the moment she had been released from the lab to the day she had met him, which in truth had only been a grand total of 2 days. As things were, neither of them knew much about the city or its layout beyond what they had already seen. Naruto could have picked up a map, but felt it was better to get a feel for the place himself. Not just learn the routes he needed to get where he wanted to, but to take in the atmosphere as well. There was a lot to be said about getting a feel not just for the city itself, but for the people in it. Learning how to feel the mood of those around him would help him know when something was wrong. "You're welcome," the blonde replied as they walked into the park. It was small, but nice, with a tile pavement and several fenced-off sections where the foliage was located. Most of the plant life consisted of large oak trees surrounded by several different types of flora. Naruto recognized a few of the flowers thanks to his green thumb. It wasn't well known or known at all, but Naruto was very good at taking care of and raising plants. Ino had become very interested in him after learning he had his own garden at home. There was a bit of disappointment when Naruto realized that there was no grassy areas for them to sit. Unlike most parks, the sections of green were fenced off. That meant they would have to either find a bench to sit on, or use the hard pavement. It was annoying, but the pair made do by finding a secluded spot where they wouldn't be seen or bothered. Which was good because he didn't need every passerby with enough curiosity to kill all 9 of a cat's lives gawking at him and Musubi while they ate. As things stood, the excitable girl already had enough attention on her, thanks to the ridiculously skimpy shrine maiden outfit and large breasts. As Naruto spread the blanket out on a bench, he looked up at the girl he had bonded to as an Ashikabi and smiled. "I'm glad that I'm able to help you experience something new. And I'm glad it's you I'm doing this with," Musubi said enthusiastically. The response was so typical of her that it caused the blonde to smile. They sat down and Naruto opened up the basket. There was a puff of smoke, and the blonde pulled out 2 steaming bowls of ramen. The moment the smell hit Musubi's nose, her stomach rumbled and drool once more began leaking out of her mouth, as her eyes glazed over while looking at the dish of noodly goodness. "That smells so good." Naruto grinned. "You're in for a real treat. This ramen is a secret recipe made by someone that had been very precious to me. She taught me how to make this, and I'm the only one outside of her family who was allowed to learn it. This is the best damn ramen you will ever taste in your life. So someone close to you taught you how to make this." Musubi pulled her attention away from the bowl of ramen, with a supreme force of effort to look at Naruto. After cocking her head to the side for a moment, she graced the blonde with a smile. "I'd really like to meet her." "You can't," at the Sekirei's confused look Naruto offered a sad smile. "Like everyone else that had been in my life, she has long since passed away." His words evoked a strangled gasp from the excitable Sekirei. It seemed that even Musubi knew what death was. A good thing too, Naruto didn't want to be forced into explaining the concept of death any more than he did sex. "I'm so sorry," Musubi said, her eyes watering as she looked down, suddenly finding an interest in staring at the blanket they were sitting on. It was like someone had flipped a switch, her entire posture screamed depression and regret. In short, if her previous looks had been of someone kicking her puppy, then this new look was of someone who had just watched an entire nursery of newborn babies getting slaughtered. "I'm supposed to be your Sekirei, but I keep bringing up your painful past." Naruto winced at the look. There was just something inherently wrong with the girl before him looking so desolate. It probably had something to do with the fact that it simply wasn't her natural expression, but more than that it was something that the blonde shinobi knew in his heart was wrong. It felt like there was something inside of him, whispering in his ear and telling him that the look of utter sadness was not one that Musubi should have, and that he should do everything in his power to keep it from appearing on her face ever again. "Hey," Naruto said softly, placing a hand under her chin and lifting up her head. He smiled at her, using his free hand to wipe away her tears. "You have nothing to be sorry about. It's not like I told you about my past, so you couldn't have known. To be honest, I've never told anyone about my past. It's something I've kept inside for a long time. But I don't mind telling you, and if you're going to be my Sekirei, then it wouldn't be good to keep secrets from you. So no more tears, okay?" Musubi sniffed, her eyes watering again, but this time in that strange look of gratitude rather than depression and regret. "Okay. Thank you for not being mad at me, Naruto-sama." Naruto chuckled before he kissed her temple. "I don't think I could ever be mad at you. Now you should know, there are still many secrets that I have yet to tell, because to put it quite simply, I have more secrets than I could tell you in any single day, or even a year. However, eventually, you will know everything there is to know about me." He gave her a wink. "We've all our lives to learn more about each other, so there's no rush, right?" He studiously ignored his own internal wincing at the thought of all our lives. Musubi might have all of her life to learn about him, but her life with less than a tenth of the number of years he had already lived. God, how much did that suck? Whether by luck or design, Musubi did not even notice the blonde's own turmoil. The brunette nodded her head with great enthusiasm, her heart warmed by his words. Right. Glad for the girl's incredibly dense attitude, Naruto was able to shift his thoughts away from his own cursed existence, and onto something more pleasant. Much more pleasant. Now let's eat before the ramen gets cold. The picnic would be considered a great success after that by the two of them. Naruto found someone who managed to appreciate ramen as much as he did. It brought him a very large grin to his face when Musubi had literally begun to cry as she proclaimed his ramen to be one of the greatest foods she had ever eaten. It was definitely an ego booster, considering he had never made ramen for anyone other than himself. It was also good that someone else appreciated the food that the gods had gifted the earth with. Musubi on the other hand learned more about Ashikabi. There was a lot more to Naruto than anyone could have first suspected. She knew the basics about him, and due to the strong bond they already shared, the brunette Sekirei could claim some smattering of knowing how his emotions ran. But during this time she had learned that Naruto had a past that brought him great pain. She could only hope he would tell her more soon, so that she might help heal the wound in his heart. It was as they were eating that Naruto noticed it, a sight that caused him to frown. Now that he was no longer focusing all of his attention on Musubi and his own thoughts, his eyes were able to take in more of his surroundings. It was not that hard to spot her. Sitting on a bench a few feet away was a woman with short light brown hair, and a sleepy expression on her face. She was wearing nothing more than a button-up shirt, a pair of panties and a doctor's coat that was stained with blood. Her blood Naruto assumed from the way it was staining her clothes. Beyond the blood stains, the most noticeable thing about her was that she had a crimson Sekirei mark on her forehead instead of her back. "Hey, Musubi-chan," Naruto said, getting the attention of the brunette happily munching away on her 8th bowl of ramen, easily keeping pace with him. The blonde only took a moment or two to pat himself on the back for his insight. He had already known Musubi had a large appetite, and while not as big as hers, Naruto ate quite a bit more than the average human himself. That the food he was eating was ramen meant his own appetite had essentially doubled. That was a lot of ramen needed to feed 2 people, hence the reason he was glad he had made so much. Naruto doubted there would even be leftovers by the time they were finished. When she looked at him, he pointed towards the woman he assumed was a Sekirei. "Why does she have her Sekirei crest on her forehead?" Musubi looked over at the hurt-looking female, blinking several times as she observed the other woman, before putting an index finger to her lower lip and looking thoughtful. "I don't know. I've never seen a Sekirei with a mark on their forehead before." She looked slightly sheepish after that. "Though, I haven't met a lot of Sekireis in the outside world." That's right, Musubi had only been in the outside world for 4 days now, 2 before she met him, and another 2 after they had met. That wasn't much time to really get much of a feel for the place, the fact that at least 2 of those days had been spent on the run notwithstanding. "She looks so lonely," Naruto whispered. Once again a small pang of anguish shot through their bond, and Musubi looked over at her Ashikabi to see compassionate blue eyes staring at the woman on the bench. A smile crossed the Sekirei's face as she saw her Ashikabi's expression and felt his emotions through their bond. This was why he was her Ashikabi. Buried under that expression that had both equal parts of amusement and a devil-may-care attitude was a person whose compassion compelled them to help others. She looked over at the Sekirei that had grabbed Naruto's attention, then back to the blonde himself. She nodded once, her decision made. Standing up, she grabbed her Ashikabi's hand and held it in her own. The blonde looked at their entwined appendages as he allowed the young woman to help him up. His eyes traveled from their hands to her face, his expression conveying confusion. We should help her, she determined with a smile so wide that her eyes were forced closed. Naruto stared at her for a few more seconds, before a smile came unbidden to his own face as well. He shook his head, wondering if he would ever stop being surprised by his Sekirei. Yeah, let's go. Naruto let his own loose fingers tighten around Musubi's hand, bringing a smile to the face of the girl in the skimpy shrine maiden outfit. Together, the two walked over to the other Sekirei who didn't even seem to notice when they stopped in front of her. Now that he got a better look at her, Naruto could definitely see that she was wounded, while her face remained expressionless. Her left hand was favoring her side, and there was a large red patch there. Hey miss, are you okay? Do you need me to call a doctor? The woman didn't seem to respond to his words. Indeed, it didn't even seem as if she had registered them, like she was dead to the world. Noticing this, Naruto crouched down in front of her so he could see her eyes. The woman looked at him for a second, blinked, then turned her eyes back down to look at something apparently only she could see. At least that was what it looked like from the outside. Naruto knew otherwise. Hey, he said in a soft voice. Are you okay? Do you want me to escort you home or? He trailed off, wondering what he was supposed to do in this situation. She must be a Sekirei judging from the mark on her head. Did that mean she had come from the labs? And if so, had there been violence involved when she left? Perhaps she had gone rogue or one of the scientists had tried to take advantage of her. I have no home, she said in a voice that was so broken that Musubi actually began shedding tears where she stood. Naruto grimaced at her words, so familiar to him that he couldn't help but let himself be taken to a time long since past. I am broken, I'm a failure. Without himself even realizing it, water began to gather in Naruto's eyes. No matter how long he walked this earth, he was a sucker for sob stories of any kind. If anything, his inability to listen to someone as they poured out their pain and soul had only gotten worse with time. Which really sucked for him because there were a lot of people who had it bad in this day and age. He generally hid that side of him by keeping his distance from everyone, but it had always been there, waiting for an opportunity to come out. It seemed that moment had finally come. He cupped the woman's face and lifted it, so she was forced to make eye contact. You are not a failure, he said, watching as the woman blinked at his proclamation. Naruto had the feeling that was the most emotion she had ever shown, since whatever had happened to leave her in this state. While someone like Musubi would have never been capable of reading this woman's emotions, he could tell she was not only surprised by his words, but more than likely by the conviction in his voice. Hopefully, it would help her snap out of this stupor. I don't know what idiot told you that, but you are most definitely no failure. But I can be winged, she said, as if that answered everything. A failure like me will never be able to find an Ashikabi. I'm useless, a discarded tool. My purpose is now gone. Zabuza-sama has no need for a broken tool. I need you to do me a favor and kill me. He could hear the words of Haku, the person who had first started him on the path to true strength, ring through his head at the light-haired Sekirei's words. It had been Haku that told him about true strength, how it only came from protecting the things that were most important to you, those things that you held dear to your heart. Hearing those words, so similar yet so different from the person that told him what it meant to be strong, caused a sharp pain to enter his chest. It was an almost physical pain that Naruto forcefully shunted to the side so he could focus on the woman before him. I may not have been able to save you, Haku, he thought to himself with gritted teeth. But I'll be damned if I let her end up in your position. He would not let this girl become like Haku. Working for a person treated her as nothing more than a tool. Even if Zabuza had not truly thought that he still acted as though he had until the end, that could easily be disposed of when its purpose was finished. He would get this girl to understand that she was not broken, she was not a discarded tool. Just because you can't be winged doesn't mean you don't have worth, Naruto said adamantly, the conviction in his words once more making the woman blink. A person's worth is not determined by something so menial. You have something that is special only to you, something no one else has, but you, something that makes you unique. That is what makes you special, and is what gives you worth. But come with us, Naruto said, once more surprising the woman whose open mouth quickly snapped closed. Come with us and I'll prove that you are worth something. I'll prove that you can shine just as well as any other Sekirei. The woman looked at him for several seconds before speaking. Okay. Naruto smiled. I didn't get your name. Ah. The woman blinked, the only sign she had heard his words. It's Akitsu. Pleasure to meet you, Akitsu-chan. It was only an hour later that the two were nearing Izumo Inn. Naruto was carrying a now sleeping Akitsu in his arms. Said woman was either subconsciously affectionate, or just wanted the blonde's body heat, because she was currently snuggling herself into his chest. After agreeing to go with them, the blonde had simply scooped her into his arms, surprising the woman greatly, and began walking home. Thankfully she had not protested and seemed to have gotten used to it, because at some point she had obviously become comfortable enough to fall asleep. Naruto looked over at Musubi as they continued walking. The girl had a smile on her face, and didn't seem to be bothered by him having another woman in his arms, though she could be faking it. "Musubi-chan," he called, getting her attention. When she looked at him he continued, saying, "Are you alright with this? Me being with another Sekirei, I mean." "Of course," Musubi said with her standard bright smile. "Why wouldn't I be okay with it? The more Sekirei Naruto-sama has, the better protected her is." Naruto's sweat dropped but eventually laughed her words off as Musubi simply being Musubi. In many ways he envied the girl for her naivety. He had been a lot like her at one point, back when he had first started out on his path as a shinobi. Sometimes he often wished he could go back to being the simple boy whose only dream was of becoming Hokage. He did have to wonder about her words, however. What does she mean by better protected? Were there people out there who would try to hurt him because he was an Ashikabi? Probably. It wouldn't surprise him if there were a few unscrupulous people like that. It was kind of off-putting that she didn't think he could take care of himself, but considering she had only seen one of his abilities, couldn't quite blame her. There would come a time when she would realize he was even more capable of a fighter than she was. The pair arrived back at Izumo Inn, and Musubi opened the door for Naruto, as he still had a sleeping Akitsu in his arms. Said blonde offered her a smile and a kiss on the cheek as a thank you, before walking inside where he ran into Mia. "Oh my, what's this?" Mia said as she walked over to them, her eyes going to the woman in Naruto's arms. The first thing her purple orbs flickered to was the mark on her forehead. Naruto took quick note of the recognition in the woman's eyes, before they left Akitsu's forehead and looked into his. "Is this a friend of yours, Naruto-san?" "She looks hurt." "She is now," Naruto replied with a shrug. When Mia gave him a confused look he decided it may be wise if he elaborated, especially since she was the landlady and the one he had to get permission from to let Akitsu live with them. "Musubi-chan and I found her alone in the park. She looked so defeated and we wanted to help her." He frowned as he looked down at the young woman. "She said she was broken, and that no one wanted her. I couldn't just leave her like that." He gave the purple-haired woman a pleading look. "Do you think it would be alright if she stayed here with us?" Mia took several seconds to gather her reply, seemingly thinking deeply about his words. After a few seconds she smiled. "She seems to have had a hard life. You know it's my policy to never turn away someone in need, and from what you said she is very much in need of help. Of course she can stay." "Thank you," Naruto graced the woman with a smile. It soon changed into a sly grin as he said, "If I wasn't sure you'd beat me half to death for it, I could kiss you for that." "Oh my," Mia placed her hands on her cheeks and affected a blush. "Aren't you bold, Naruto-san, saying you would do something so intimate to a widower like me? What would my dear late husband think?" Said blonde just rolled his eyes, not even deigning to reply to her parting shot as he headed upstairs. Musubi made to follow, but Mia held her up, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And how about you, Musubi-chan? Did you have a good time?" "Oh yes," Musubi said with a nod, bobbing her head up and down enthusiastically. "I had a very good time with Naruto-sama. He even fed me." She looked up the stairs where Naruto had disappeared to and smiled. "I'm so lucky to have such an amazing Ashikabi. He's so warm, and kind and dependable. I never imagined I could be so lucky." "Musubi-chan," Naruto called from upstairs. I kinda need a little help getting the door open." "Oh, right. Sorry, I'll be right there." Musubi bowed to Mia and quickly ran up the stairs. Mia looked up after her before holding a hand to her mouth and giggling. "Such an interesting pair, those two are. I feel they're going to bring a lot of good changes to this place." Musubi finished climbing the stairs and walked over to the door to hers in Naruto's room. "Sorry about that," she apologized as she opened the door. "Mia-san wanted to talk to me about our time at the park." "It's alright," Naruto replied reassuringly. "I kinda figured she would, and I don't mind you telling her about our time there. I was just hoping it could wait until we get Akitsu-chan in bed. I don't know what happened to her, but she could use some rest in a nice bed." "I agree," Musubi said as Naruto walked into the room. He moved over to the air mattress and managed to show some dexterity with his feet by grasping the blanket between his toes. Pulling back the covers he knelt down and lowered Akitsu onto the bed, then pulled the covers up to her neck. Already missing the warmth from his body, Akitsu stirred. Her eyes opened up a crack before widening ever so slightly as she took a look around the room. Her eyes landed on the blonde, making her relax as she saw his ocean blue eyes looking at her in concern. "So it wasn't a dream. Did you want it to be?" asked Naruto, giving her a wink. When she shook her head no, he grinned. "Don't worry, this is no dream. From now on, you'll be with us, a new addition to our." He paused, wondering about what the appropriate term for them was. After a second he decided to go with family. Akitsu looked at him in confusion. "Family?" "That's right," Naruto said, the impulsive nature of his youth coming out to play after several thousand years of inaction. "Musubi-chan wants a sister, and well, I'm not actually sure what we are yet, but I think we'll be something more than brother and sister." Akitsu, it seemed, was not as naive as Musubi, because she caught on to his meaning fairly quickly, if the blush on her face was anything to go by. "So you'll take care of me? That's right. You won't abandon me." In response to her question, Naruto leaned down until their noses were touching. Looking into her eyes, he said, "I promise to never abandon you. No matter what happens, I will always look after you, and cherish you as someone as beautiful as you deserves to be cherished. I swear this on my life as a shinobi." "Shinobi?" wondered Akitsu before her mind was swept away when Naruto kissed her. The woman's mind blanked completely. She had never expected to have someone want her like this. She was broken after all. Yet this man was kissing her. She could almost feel the emotions he was pouring into the act. Slowly, almost tentatively, she began to kiss back. Her arms came up and wrapped around the blonde's neck, and she could feel her entire body becoming almost unbearably hot. Much like the last time Naruto kissed a Sekirei, he could feel his chakra being drained. However, where Musubi seemed to continue sucking his chakra out until she gained her wings, with Akitsu it felt almost like something was blocking her from gaining the necessary chakra to do the same. Concentrating on his chakra, Naruto followed its path as it flowed through the woman's body, tracing it. He had not been able to do this when he had winged Musubi, being as startled as he was. But this time, the blonde made sure to follow the path it took to its conclusion. When he did, a frown marred his face. While Naruto could not be certain due to how shocked he was by the situation last time, he would have bet his entire fortune on his chakra going to Musubi's back. That was, after all, where her crest was located. But the Akitsu, he could still feel his chakra flowing through her, but instead of stopping at her back where her crest would be and gathering there until she had enough to gain her wings, it stopped at her forehead and pushed against something. The need for air soon became relevant, and Naruto pulled back with a gasp, greedily sucking in the much-needed oxygen. He looked down at Akitsu and saw tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Hey now," he whispered, using his left hand to gently wipe the tears away. "What's with the tears?" Akitsu started, her despondent eyes dropping away from Naruto's questioning ones. "I was really hoping that I could truly be your Sekirei." Naruto frowned. Placing the hand that was wiping tears under her chin, he pulled her face back towards his. "Let's not give up yet," he said, causing her eyes to turn to him. "I still have one more thing I want to try." And with that he pressed his lips back down against hers. This time, he did not just follow the flow of it as it traveled through the woman's pathways. He prepared and waited, and when he felt his chakra hit that strange block that had been keeping his chakra from going any further, Naruto began actively channeling his chakra through her via the kiss. He sent a surge of his potent and powerful chakra into her, pushing it against the block. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, without warning, Naruto felt something give before the block broke, and his chakra surged through Akitsu like his namesake. Within MBI headquarters, alarms were going off, and several workers were running around like headless chickens. The alarms were blaring and panic had set in. Everyone was trying to figure out what was going on, and of course, all of their actions were counteracting the actions of each other, making it impossible for them to get any of the answers they sought. Fortunately for them, the cavalry had arrived. Unfortunately for them, she was a hard ass that they all feared even more, the Hiroto Minaka. A slender woman with gray hair and gray eyes walked into the room and began trying to return order to the place. She had a long scar over her left eye, and was wearing trousers, a black top and a white lab coat. "Everybody calm down before I shove my foot so far up your asses that you won't be sitting for months," she shouted as several workers typed away frantically on their computers, in an attempt to gather as much data as possible about the current event that was causing the sirens to go off. She walked over to one of the workstations and looked at the data flowing, ignoring the way the man stiffened from her mere presence alone. "What have you found out?" "It's Akitsu, ma'am," one of the workers shouted. "She's just been winged." "Impossible," the woman said as she walked over to the computer and watched the feedback. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. "This shouldn't be possible. I want all information you have on Akitsu and the Ashikabi who winged her, and I want it yesterday. Get to work." "Ma'am." Up on the top of the MBI headquarters, Hiroto Minaka watched the proceedings inside of the lab on his portable monitor with a grin. "Uzumaki Naruto, such an interesting and mysterious character you are. A figure from the past. Will you be the one who is destined to help these little birds spread their wings?" There was an explosion of light where Akitsu's mark was, followed by an even more brilliant light from behind her. A large pair of angel wings burst from her back, great ethereal wings the same shade as ice. They conformed to the room as if they were a physical object, following the path of the floor as they moved around her back and curved upwards to wrap around the two of them in a protective embrace. The room began to fog over, frost formed on the window, and a layer of ice began creeping along the floor, walls, and ceiling. Naruto and Akitsu came back up for air, their released breaths coming out as large puffs of fog. Naruto looked at Akitsu's flushed face, his gaze traveling from her moist pink lips to her forehead. "Hey, your mark is gone," Naruto commented with a grin. "Looks like my theory was right." Akitsu's eyes widened and her hand went to her forehead. "It's gone," she whispered. "Yep, and you've got wings," he looked at her and winked. "I guess you're not so broken after all, eh?" It was impossible for Kitsu to keep the tears from her eyes as she looked at Naruto. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she said in a repeating mantra over and over again. Naruto smiled, kissed her on the forehead and said, get some rest, tomorrow you'll begin a new life with Musubi-chan and I. Yes, my Ashikabi-sama, Akitsu said, closing her eyes as she let sleep take her. A small smile making its way onto her face. Her last thoughts before sleep claimed her were on her Ashikabi, and her hope that they would share a bright future together. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.